Hey, let's do something special for Grandpa's birthday. Great idea! Let's make his favorite beef stew and celebrate together. I smiled warmly, agreeing with my grandson Adrian's suggestion. Over the next few days, in preparation for my husband Henry's birthday next week, Adrian was learning how to make beef stew under my guidance. Adrian, who had never really cooked before, held the knife clumsily, and I had to resist the urge to help him, but I continued to watch over him diligently. It's amazing how quickly children grow. In just a few days, Adrian could cut the ingredients to the right size with a knife. Finally, the long-awaited day of Henry's birthday arrived. After spending a long time cooking, I asked Henry to taste the stew, and he took a bite with a happy expression. He tilted his head slightly, then suddenly stood up with the stew and headed to the bathroom. I frowned, puzzled, as I watched his retreating back. After a while, when Henry returned, I said with a slightly irritated tone, "Henry, we spent 5 hours making that beef stew. Why did you pour it down the sink?" My words came out a bit petulantly, but I was genuinely upset. Even if he was dissatisfied with the taste, was there really a need to throw it away? I could have adjusted the flavor, there had to be a way to fix it. Henry looked at me in surprise. "Did you eat this, Julie?" "No, I haven't." Adrian quietly walked up to Henry and whispered in a very small voice, "Thank you, Grandpa." I was completely lost for words, when Henry smiled softly and gave a small bow. "My name is Julie, I'm 54 years old. I live with my kind but slightly timid husband, Henry, and a kitten we recently adopted. I run a local beauty salon inherited from my parents. Thanks to its prime location, the salon is thriving, supported by the local community. The salon also serves as our home. We use the first floor for the salon and live on the second floor. While I work, I sometimes feel bad for leaving the kitten in its cage all day due to the faint noises from upstairs. A few days after getting the kitten, I decided to let it roam freely in the living room. Whenever I went upstairs to check on it between appointments, I was always surprised by its unexpected behaviors, like knocking over vases or chewing on clothes. As a hairdresser, I pride myself on always greeting customers with a smile and meeting their hair needs with my skills. This has led to my salon becoming well known through word of mouth, attracting new customers. Of course, I regularly attend seminars and training to improve my skills as a hairstylist. While I focus on my work, I also cherish the time I spend with my family. Henry and I have been married without major conflicts, supporting and understanding each other throughout our marriage. Perhaps because Henry is 2 years older, I tend to rely on him quite a bit. Although I'm confident in my hairdressing skills, I struggle with managing inventory, like shampoo, and have left that up to Henry. He handles appointments more efficiently, and his efforts have enabled online booking, which has helped attract new clients. Henry is very kind and timid. When I fell in love with a kitten at the pet shop and begged to keep it, he reluctantly agreed. Even though he's not fond of animals. "I'm not really good with animals." He keeps his distance from the kitten. But since it's now part of the family, I figured he would eventually grow to love it. I spontaneously named the kitten Anna. In the neighborhood, my son, now named Tom, his wife Sophia, and their son Adrian live happily together. Adrian is my treasure. The young boy is very attached to me, often pleading, "I want to spend more time with Grandma." This has sometimes made my relationship with Sophia challenging. Adrian asks me for a haircut once a month. When I suggested, "How about asking Mom to cut it for you?" Adrian replied with an innocent smile, loud enough for nearby Sophia to hear, "Because Grandma is better at it." Sophia smiled too, but her eyes were not laughing. After finishing Adrian's haircut, she seemed somewhat dissatisfied and murmured, "It's indeed good. I just wanted to enjoy my time with my adorable grandson, but if it meant hurting my daughter-in-law's pride, I thought I'd rather not cut Adrian's hair anymore." However, Adrian became even more attached to me, wanting to see me more. Sophia and Tom, both working busy jobs, likely contributed to the increased days I took care of Adrian. I temporarily closed my salon to cherish my moments with Adrian, taking him for walks and to the park. Yet, I was concerned about Sophia's attitude in my heart. Though she never said it out loud, I could tell she was clearly displeased whenever Adrian and I did something together. One day, I decided to address the issue with Sophia directly. "Sophia, since we're both hairstylists, there might be a sort of rivalry, right? But we're family, so how about we try to get along better?" Sophia looked surprised at first, but then smiled and said, "I'll think about it. Getting along with Julie might be good for Tom and Adrian." I was relieved by Sophia's words. I still don't know what will happen between Sophia and me in the future, but I resolved to continue valuing our family bond. Hoping for more moments of laughter and play with Adrian, I went on with my busy days. One day, Tom's family came to visit my house. Tom and Adrian were playing with Anna, our playful kitten, using a toy similar to a cat teaser. I was writing in the cat care diary I've kept since the day we brought Anna home, sitting beside them. Suddenly, I remembered next Sunday would be Henry's birthday and called Adrian over. "Hey, how about we do something special for Grandpa's birthday? Maybe we can throw a different kind of fun party." Adrian, a bit puzzled but with sparkling eyes, looked at me. "Great idea! Let's make Grandpa's favorite beef stew and celebrate with everyone." I smiled warmly, agreeing with Adrian's proposal. For the next few days, Adrian learned how to make beef stew under my guidance. I decided to let Adrian do all the work, like chopping and frying, while I just gave verbal instructions. Adrian, who had apparently never cooked before, held the knife awkwardly, making me want to intervene, but I kept watching over him. Children grow so fast, and in just a few days, Adrian could cut ingredients to a decent size with a knife. Finally, the much-awaited day of Henry's birthday arrived. I sent Henry out to go play somewhere until the evening, meanwhile inviting Tom's family over. I asked Adrian if he could handle making the stew, and Sophia, standing next to him, smiled and hugged his shoulders. Actually, he's been eating stew almost every day, getting really into making it. Today, he plans to cook it for a long time to bring out a deep flavor. "Oh, that's authentic!" It takes a long time to keep stirring the pot to prevent burning, so I'll stand in the kitchen with Adrian. "Julie, could you handle the decorations and picking up the cake?" I nodded deeply, thinking it was a clear division of tasks. I expressed my gratitude with a smile and left the stew to Adrian and Sophia. While I went out for decorations and cake pickup, I returned to a house filled with the aroma of stew. It smelled delicious. Happy, I headed to the kitchen to find Adrian staring at the stew pot alone. I instantly felt something was off with Adrian's face. He looked tense, staring at the stew, and it seemed like tears were welling up in his eyes. "Adrian, what's wrong? Are you okay?" After hesitating and mumbling for a while, Adrian finally burst into tears. "Grandma, I messed up the beef stew." I was surprised, but placed my hand on Adrian's cheek. "It's okay, Adrian. Everyone messes up cooking sometimes. What's important is celebrating Grandpa's birthday with all our hearts." "But, Grandma, the stew probably tastes bad. I'm sorry. I want something else today." "What are you talking about? It might not be a failure. How about this? Let's have Grandpa taste it, and if it's good, we'll all eat. How's that?" Adrian looked on the verge of tears at my suggestion. What a sensitive child. But the stew didn't look burnt, and the ingredients were cut to the right size. What could be wrong with this stew? Well, if Henry tastes it, surely Adrian will be convinced. As the sky began to turn red, Henry came home. At the same time, Adrian and I had Henry sit down to explain what had happened. "So, if I taste it and it's good, we'll all eat it, right?" Henry took a bite of the stew with a happy expression. Then tilted his head slightly. Suddenly, he stood up with the stew and headed straight for the bathroom. I frowned in confusion as I watched his retreating back. After a while, when Henry came back, I said with a slightly irritated expression, "Henry, that stew took 5 hours to make. Why did you pour it down the sink?" I sounded a bit petulant, but I was genuinely angry. Regardless of whether he was dissatisfied with the taste, was there really a need to throw it away? We could have added more roux to adjust the flavor, there had to be a way to fix it. Henry looked at me in surprise. "Did you eat this, Julie?" "No, I haven't." Quietly, Adrian walked up to Henry and whispered in a really small voice, "Thank you, Grandpa." As I became thoroughly confused and fell silent, Henry made a gentle smile and nodded. "Sorry. It turns out the stew had nuts in it. Julie's allergic, so I thought I better be careful." Hearing that, my expression froze for a moment. I have a severe nut allergy and need to be particularly cautious with food. Adrian mentioned he messed up the stew, but I hadn't tasted it myself because of my allergy. I've always been extremely cautious about nuts, not eating anything unless I'm absolutely certain it doesn't contain nuts. It's become a habit, unconsciously being careful about food others have made, regardless of it being made by family. Usually, when Henry and I eat out, he checks for nuts, not exactly as a taster, but to ensure my safety. After a bad experience with incorrect information from a restaurant staff, he's always been the one to taste first if there's any uncertainty about nuts. My nut allergy is that serious. Known well by Tom and Sophia. With mixed feelings of surprise and anger, I said, "I've mentioned my nut allergy often, haven't I? Why were there nuts in it?" I wasn't really addressing anyone in particular, but Sophia, who was nearby, spoke up. Looking a bit flustered, she bowed slightly and said, "I'm sorry, Julie. Maybe Adrian accidentally added the nuts." "Adrian did?" "He loves nuts, so probably he didn't know about your allergy and added them," Sophia said gently, hugging Adrian's shoulder. It was news to me that Adrian liked nuts. I had never told him about my allergy, though I had mentioned that I dislike nuts, recalling a time we laughed about both of us not liking nuts. "But I told Adrian that I dislike nuts." "Julie? Adrian loves nuts. It can't be helped. It's good that it didn't turn into a major accident," Sophia said, leaving me staring at her, bewildered and surprised. Adrian was looking down. A mix of sadness and apology on his face. Confused by Adrian's reaction, I was trying to figure out what was happening. I might be missing some crucial facts. Sensing the uneasy atmosphere, Tom suggested, "Let's discuss this another day, shall we? After all, today is Henry's birthday. We wouldn't want to spoil the fun, right?" Tom said in a tone that seemed to treat everyone like children. Then Henry, stroking his chin, suggested, "Let's check the surveillance camera." Sophia, surprised, uttered, "What?" I didn't miss the way Sophia's face turned pale at Henry's mention of checking the camera we recently installed for the cat. I usually only turn it on while I'm working at the salon, but today I left it on by accident, Henry muttered to himself. "No, Henry, we'll make sure Adrian learns from his mistake about accidentally adding the nuts. There's no need to play back the camera. It's my way of apologizing for throwing away the stew that took hours to make. I at least want to see the effort Adrian put into cooking it." Henry said this with a gentle smile, but his eyes were not smiling at all. He took the camera set up for the cat and inserted it into the computer connected to the TV to start playback. From the camera mounted above the refrigerator, the scene of cooking in the kitchen was clearly displayed. This camera also has the capability to record audio, and the footage showed Sophia and Adrian talking while simmering the stew. Sophia, looking around restlessly, suggested, "Come on, if there's no food, let's just go out to eat." But Henry, ignoring her words, turned up the volume of the playback. Amid the static, Sophia's and Adrian's conversation could be heard. Sophia, in a rather commanding tone, was seen handing nuts to Adrian, urging him to hurry up. Adrian refused, shaking his head and pushing the nuts back towards Sophia's chest. Then, Sophia slapped Adrian across the cheek. Adrian fell to the ground, and in the silence that followed, Sophia was seen finally chopping the nuts on the cutting board. Humming a tune, she said, "I'll cook it long enough so that old lady won't notice," as she continued to crush the nuts into a finer powder with an evil smirk. Adrian, with tears in his voice, pleaded, "Let's stop. Grandma might suffer, but Sophia looked down at him with a very cold expression. If you tell anyone, Mommy will get arrested. You okay with that? I don't want that. It's okay. I just want to play a little trick on Julie. It's our secret. Sophia whispered, winking and pointing her index finger to her lips, as she proceeded to add the crushed nuts to the stew pot. Fully aware of the severe allergic reaction I could have. Henry and I were deeply shocked as we watched, until Tom, sounding a bit frightened, asked, "Why would you do something like this?" Realizing everything was exposed, Sophia gave up on pretending and crossed her arms with a pout, saying, "Julie has it so good. She owns her salon, works freely, and never struggles with conversation since it's all regular customers." We exchanged looks, wondering what she was talking about. Sophia began to complain about her job at the salon, mentioning the long hours of standing, insufficient breaks, and how the store's policy of prioritizing customers' appointments over staff holidays meant she couldn't take proper paid leave. Despite that, Julie's salon frequently closes for her to go for walks or shopping with Adrian. At first, I was grateful, but then it just made me increasingly angry. So you tampered with the stew by adding nuts, just to cause Julie distress. And you even cooked it for 5 hours to ensure the taste wouldn't be detected. Even Henry, usually quiet and gentle, began to speak more sternly. If I had ingested the nuts, a small amount might just cause swelling in my mouth or lips, but eating too much could lead to anaphylaxis. Having been cautious about my allergies since childhood, I've never had severe symptoms, but in hindsight, it seems Henry was more concerned about my diet than I was. So, you were planning to blame Adrian if I ate the stew and ended up in danger, weren't you, Sophia? Henry's calm explanation made everyone aware of the gravity of Sophia's actions. Tom was the first to deeply apologize to me, shouting at Sophia to do the same. However, Henry, without changing his expression, took out his phone and quietly said, "I'm calling the police." The moment the word police was mentioned, Sophia's face turned pale, her eyes widening in shock. The disbelief of just for putting nuts in the stew was written all over her face. Tom tried to stop Henry, but Henry, usually seen with a gentle smile, sternly refused. "This is a crime that could have led to a serious accident. I want the police to handle it appropriately." After calling the police, I held Adrian for a while, comforting him as he seemed to regret not resisting more. Adrian's small body was trembling. In such moments, not knowing what to say, all I could do was continue to hold my grandson close. Turning to Sophia, who still seemed unconvinced, I began. "You know, what saddens me the most isn't the danger I was put in, but the fact you tried to blame a child, Adrian, and attempted to destroy the life we have as a family." Sophia remained silent, staring off into the distance. Now exposed, she looked at me with eyes that had resigned to her fate, cold and defeated. "All this fuss about allergies. It's overblown. Nuts are subtly included in various dishes. Do we have to be so cautious about nuts in everything we make here? Yes, it's not an exaggeration. I've been cautious about what I eat since I was a child. How tedious. It's just a rash or something minor, right?" As Sophia reapplied her lipstick, Anna, the kitten, came from the next room and suddenly started climbing up her dress towards her neck, claws out. "What's this?" Sophia screamed in pain from Anna's tiny claws, standing still without resistance. It seemed Anna was intrigued by her necklace. As Anna reached her neck, clinging desperately to Sophia, she sneezed loudly. Anna, shocked but determined not to be shaken off, dug her claws in further. The sneezing continued, and Sophia, struggling to breathe, tried to peel Anna off, but only stretched her clothes as Anna's claws were tangled. When Tom picked Anna up, Sophia sat down, coughing violently. Tears in her eyes, she held her chest, trying to catch her breath, while looking at Anna. I rubbed her back gently and asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded after taking a few deep breaths. "I think it's a cat allergy. It's similar to hay fever symptoms, but have you ever experienced this before?" Sophia shook her head slightly, covering her nose as she left the room. After washing her face in the bathroom, she returned, glaring at Anna while drying her face with a towel. Henry picked up Anna, gently stroking her head. I realized I had never seen Henry holding Anna before. Despite her small and cute appearance, Henry seemed afraid of Anna, but now he held her close to his chest as if she were a precious baby. Allergies can vary in severity, but for the person affected, it can be very painful and difficult. Even if it was a light-hearted decision to add nuts, I want you to understand the gravity of your actions. Sophia continued to cough occasionally. Soon, 2 police officers arrived at our home to mediate the situation. The discussion turned to what actions I sought from Sophia, knowing that adding nuts to the stew when aware of an allergy could constitute a specific crime. Sophia is an important part of my family, being my son's wife. I didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily but expressed a sincere desire for her to reflect on her actions properly. The senior officer spoke very calmly, and Sophia, looking worn out, began to reveal her actions and feelings up to now. It became clear that she had been trying to harm me through Adrian and had been harsh towards him when he resisted. For Tom, hearing this was a shocking revelation, and a few months after the incident, he initiated a divorce. Tom said wistfully, "I dreamed of running a salon together like you and Dad," which deeply moved me. A year has passed since then. I chose not to pursue criminal charges or a lawsuit regarding the nuts in the stew. However, word spread quickly, and Sophia could no longer live in the neighborhood, resorting to moving back in with her parents. I hold no resentment or anger towards Sophia, rather, I worry about her and occasionally reach out via text, asking if she's okay or needs anything, despite it possibly being seen as meddling. For months, there was no response until one day, I received a simple message from her saying, "I'm sorry." She seems to be reflecting and trying to grow from this experience, and I truly want to forgive her. Since then, my husband and I have welcomed Tom and Adrian to live with us in this house. Henry has become even more vigilant about what I eat since the beef stew nuts incident, and I feel incredibly fortunate to have such a caring partner. We try to create many happy memories for Adrian, who went through a tough experience, by going out together. While I am grateful for my successful work life, I strive to further improve myself, holding even more confidence in my abilities. Anna has grown too big to be called a kitten anymore, stretching out under the table in the living room, asleep. Usually purring contentedly, Anna approaches me when I'm about to eat, sniffing the ingredients as if checking them out, then walks away after a while. I don't think there's a deeper meaning to Anna's actions, but it makes me feel as though I'm protected by many beings around me, filling me with a sense of happiness today as well. I guess I still prefer you. Poor wife. Just married yesterday, my husband laughed at me with his mistress, making a fool of me. Caught off guard, I was speechless. I couldn't understand why he married me if he was having an affair, or what he was thinking when he proposed. But one thing was clear, I couldn't stay with him anymore. Please, do as you wish. Despite the turmoil, I was anything but calm inside, but I couldn't bear to deal with these 2 unreasonable people any longer. My name is Emily Johnson, 31 years old. I work in an office, and since starting my job, I've been going out more on weekends with colleagues and friends. Thanks to that, my hobbies have expanded from reading and watching movies to include more physical activities, making my life more fulfilling. Though my job is sedentary, I've become more active on weekends. I feel like I've gotten stronger since becoming a working adult. During this lifestyle, I met my husband, Michael, in my late 20s at a golf tournament I was invited to by a colleague. Michael loved golf and patiently taught me, a beginner at the time. We were the same age, which made it easy to talk, and that golf outing was really enjoyable. We didn't exchange contact information then, and I thought that would be the end of it. However, we kept bumping into each other when I went out and eventually exchanged numbers. We started dating as we realized we shared many hobbies and got along well. We dated for about 3 years, 2 of which we lived together. Then he proposed, and we began planning our wedding. When we moved in together, we decided I would cook and Michael would clean, which worked well. Michael liked things tidy and kept the house clean. But I had one issue with him: his obsession with hobbies. He enjoyed golf and cycling outdoors and gaming indoors. He also meticulously maintained his golf clubs and cycling gear. Sometimes, he would take over 30 minutes to come for dinner when called. I understood the feeling of getting caught up in something since it happened to me too. However, it was frustrating when meals got cold because he wouldn't come immediately. I understand my husband, Michael, likes to take care of his own equipment. Unlike me, who rents stuff as needed, he prefers owning and maintaining his own, which takes time. I get it because I play video games too, though not as much as him. I know how it feels to be so caught up in a game that you just can't stop. But there's a limit, you know? Hey, can you come to dinner before it gets cold? You can pause your game at a good spot in like 1 to 2 minutes, right? So, I've been reminding Michael frequently not to get too lost in his hobbies. I understand wanting to enjoy hobbies, but if that's too much, at least set aside specific times for them. Our meal times are pretty much fixed, so I asked him to plan his activities around that. We made sure to have our own time for hobbies, even when living together. But there were times, even when we were supposed to be spending time together, when Michael would be preoccupied with his hobbies and not fully engaged in our conversations. After it happened dozens of times, I reached my breaking point. Sorry, I just got too carried away, Michael would say, showing remorse, but he never really changed. He seemed to feel bad about it, always apologizing after I pointed it out. Sorry for always having to remind you. Despite this behavior from Michael, my irritation towards him would deflate. There were times when I felt anxious about going through with the marriage, thinking it was just his old habits and hoping he would change. Even though he didn't improve much after my reminders, I had no other complaints, so I decided to patiently keep pointing it out. Sometimes, Michael would suddenly go out for night cycling and return hours later. So late? Isn't it dangerous? Why don't you go tomorrow? I was worried because there's less visibility at night and more risk of accidents. It's fine. Plus, there are fewer people at night, so I can cycle as much as I want without worrying about bumping into anyone, he'd say, excitedly heading out. I was concerned when he would stay out for hours, but I knew the joy of hobbies and couldn't really stop him. I thought he probably wanted to enjoy his hobbies as much as possible now, knowing things would change once we had kids and he couldn't immerse himself as much. I frequently reminded him not to stay out too late, but I couldn't bring myself to stop him completely. Still, I was a bit worried about his deep involvement in his hobbies. But when we talked about our life after marriage, I felt I was worrying too much. Especially when we talked about kids, Michael seemed eager to spend time with them. He was also enthusiastic about planning our wedding, so I believed things would change after we got married. Our wedding preparations went smoothly, and we had a big ceremony after registering our marriage. We were blessed by colleagues, friends, and family, which made me very happy. Since Michael and I met through mutual friends and colleagues, many of our guests already knew our relationship, making the wedding celebration even more joyful. I remember smiling throughout the ceremony, feeling incredibly happy. We planned to go on our honeymoon a few days after the wedding. Though the wedding was fun, it was tiring, so we went to bed early that night, looking forward to our trip. I wondered if I'd be able to sleep with all the excitement, but I was more tired than I thought and fell asleep quickly. However, maybe because of what I was thinking before sleeping, I woke up much earlier than usual the next day. I woke up refreshed, but it was still around 4 a.m. I thought about going back to sleep, but then I realized Michael wasn't in bed. Thinking he might have woken up early too, I decided to get up and talk with him. As I left the room to find him, I heard voices in the living room and was curious. I thought he might be on the phone, but as I got closer, I realized it was a woman's voice, not over the phone. That woke me up completely. A strange woman was in our house, talking with Michael, alone. Realizing this, the happiness I felt just moments ago turned ice cold. Nervous but driven, I burst through the door to see who Michael was with. In the room, there was Michael and an unfamiliar woman. Both fully dressed early in the morning, the woman with perfect makeup. She was quite beautiful and dressed in an elegant and feminine style. I was confused about why she was in our house, but had a bad feeling about it.
What's going on here?
I asked Michael coldly, surprised and confused. I had hoped it was just my overthinking, but my fears were quickly shattered. In response to my question, my husband Michael replied in a carefree, cheerful tone, saying something unbelievable.
I've decided to call off our marriage and marry her instead. I guess I still prefer my ex.
He said, chuckling and putting his arm around the woman next to him. Poor wife. The woman mocked me without any shame, chuckling as she looked down on me.
Huh?
I was dumbfounded. We had just gotten married yesterday, and here he was, saying such things. It took me a moment to grasp what he was saying, as it was so casually stated. As I began to comprehend his words, I doubted if this was the same man I had prepared for marriage with just yesterday. Stunned, I stared at Michael, who was behaving as usual. Looking at me, the woman, with a demeaning look, said,
"Kind of feel sorry for the wife. But then, a wife who doesn't notice anything is questionable too."
She then smugly started bragging about how close she and Michael were. According to her, she was Michael's ex-girlfriend, and they had reconnected by chance, leading to an affair that had been going on for a year. Indeed, that was around the time Michael suddenly started going on night cycling trips. His actions now made sense in retrospect, but at the time, I had only thought he was getting more into his hobbies. The idea that he was cheating was completely unexpected.
Michael has always been crazy about me,
the ex-girlfriend boasted, flaunting her supposed superiority in beauty and charm. Indeed, in contrast to her well-dressed and made-up appearance, I was in my plain pajamas and makeup-free, which felt humiliating. Her words infuriated me, but the shock of learning about Michael's affair and being caught off guard in the morning left me speechless. However, I reassured myself that my character was definitely better than hers. But I couldn't understand why Michael proposed to me if he was cheating. As I pondered this, Michael scornfully said,
"At first, you were nice and fun to be with, but you became too nagging.
I'm tired of being with you." He went on about how great his ex was, and she looked triumphantly satisfied. Apparently, he didn't like being constantly reminded by me. This revelation made me realize Michael's true nature, and I felt no issue in deciding on divorce. While initially overwhelmed with sadness at being cheated on and criticized for my concern, I was now just astonished. I had loved Michael, but now I felt my feelings cooling rapidly, able to think about the situation with unexpected calmness. While I couldn't forgive him, I was relieved that there were no children involved between us.
"Well, we just got married, but let's divorce. I'll need to explain the reasons to our acquaintances,"
I said calmly, thinking about what lay ahead. I felt a bit guilty about divorcing so soon after our wedding, celebrated by so many. The paperwork would be complicated since we were already registered, which was a bit disheartening. But considering the circumstances, it was clear who was at fault and who was behaving unreasonably. I was surprisingly composed. Though I was angry about Michael's affair, I knew others would support me, which was somewhat comforting. Then Michael shocked me further.
"What are you talking about? I'm not getting a divorce."
Despite saying he wanted to marry his mistress, his refusal to divorce was baffling.
Huh?
His casual statement made me wonder if bigamy had suddenly become legal in the US. His words made no sense, especially since we had seemed so compatible in hobbies and values. As I stood there confused, the two of them started talking as if they had a great idea. Michael, seemingly wanting to hide his affair, smugly suggested filing a missing person report.
"You know, even if we don't file for divorce, it'll automatically happen after 3 years. You'll get sympathy and concern from everyone around you, and I can marry her without any trouble. It's perfect for both of us, right?"
He was threatening me, suggesting I play the role of a pitiful woman abandoned right after marriage. Moreover, his win-win was clearly a loss for me. He seemed oblivious to the fact that he was asking me to waste 3 years for his sake.
It's bad optics to divorce so soon after getting married, right?
The ex-girlfriend said, smugly agreeing with Michael, thinking she was being considerate. I felt like I was looking at two aliens with their bizarre logic. Leaving me dumbstruck, the two of them, satisfied with their plan, hurriedly got up to leave the house.
Then go ahead and file a missing person report.
Disgusted with their reasoning and realizing it was pointless to talk further, I, exhausted from the morning's events, sighed and said,
"Please, do whatever you want."
When I said that, they seemed to think I had accepted their proposal and happily left the house together. After they left the house, I was initially stunned by the rapid turn of events, but I knew I couldn't afford to be lost in thought. I had to focus on what lay ahead. Regaining my composure, I quickly started making plans for the future. Then, suddenly, I heard, "Hey, what are you doing? I know you're there. Open up." 3 days later, my husband Michael, who had run away on a whim, stormed back into the house. In a frenzy and clearly not in his right mind, he was accompanied by his ex-girlfriend, who seemed quite confused.
"What brings you here, the man who cheated and left?"
Anticipating Michael might return, I remained calm and did not open the door, responding through it instead. Annoyed by my response, Michael yelled,
"Don't mess with me! You haven't sold my stuff, have you?"
In fact, after he left, I had gathered all of Michael's belongings, intending to sell them as compensation for his infidelity and disturbance. If he had no intention of returning, I figured it wouldn't be a problem to sell them. I had taken photos of his packed items and emailed him about my intention to sell them. These were items he had treasured, so it was a bit of retaliation for his thoughtless actions. I thought he might not notice since he was planning to go missing, but he quickly responded in a panic, which I ignored. Despite his subsequent emails pleading not to sell, throw away, or asking to have them sent, I felt no obligation to heed the words of a cheating husband. That's why he came to the house in such a frenzy today. Realizing I had no intention of opening the door, Michael, who apparently had a key, entered the house on his own, pushed past me, and immediately began checking and moving out his belongings.
"Good, everything's here."
Relieved to see his gaming console, golf equipment, and mountain bike all intact, Michael was visibly pleased. Some items were quite expensive, worth thousands of dollars, so his joy at finding them all was evident. I was dismayed that he prioritized possessions over everything else, even though he had talked about disappearing. Watching Michael frantically check his belongings, I felt an additional chill toward him.
"Did you really come back just for these things?"
I thought, not the only one feeling this way, as the ex-girlfriend looked at him with a cold gaze. She had not expected Michael to prioritize his belongings over their future together. Although Michael told her to help, she just stood there, stunned. Then, voices at the open front door caught my attention.
"Good morning, Emily. We came to help."
"Good morning.
Is everything okay? Why is the door wide open?"
My in-laws had planned to visit today, but Michael and his ex-girlfriend, unaware of this, panicked and tried to hide, but it was too late. Before they could hide, my in-laws entered the house. Seeing my husband Michael, who wasn't supposed to be there, they exclaimed in surprise.
"You! What are you doing here? Do you realize what you've done to Emily? You've caused trouble for everyone."
I had already informed my family and friends that Michael had cheated and run away. I also reported that he said to file a missing person report. Initially skeptical, my in-laws began to believe it when they couldn't get in touch with their son and learned about his affair. My parents had come yesterday to help with moving preparations, and today it was my in-laws' turn. I had told them I didn't want to live in a house that reminded me of my cheating husband, and they, apologizing for their son's behavior, kindly offered to help. I had always had a good relationship with my in-laws. I often stayed at their house, joining them for their health walks, cooking with my mother-in-law, and playing board games, which was my father-in-law's hobby. They were delighted when Michael and I first visited to announce our marriage. Once, while spending time with them, my mother-in-law let slip why they were so happy about our marriage. It was because of Michael's ex-girlfriend,
who had previously been a topic of marriage discussion. She was overly possessive, often storming in on Michael regardless of time or place. Additionally, she was rude to my in-laws, speaking to them disrespectfully. Her bad behavior led my in-laws to oppose the marriage, but it only made the two of them more stubborn about it. So, they were trying to go against my in-laws' wishes and get married. But the ex-girlfriend had been overly clingy to Michael from the start, making it uncomfortable for him at work, and eventually, he had to change jobs because of her, leading to their breakup. As I listened to my mother-in-law speaking about the ex-girlfriend and her outrageous behavior, I couldn't say much more than nod in agreement. That's why we were so happy when Emily became our daughter-in-law. Thank you so much, she said sincerely, making me realize how much they must have struggled at the time. Having already heard this from her, when Michael ran off with his ex, I knew he was too simple-minded for me to handle, which made it easy for me to decide on the divorce. My in-laws, who had been so happy about our marriage, were understandably furious with their son's disgraceful behavior. Upon finding Michael in the house, they immediately began scolding their irresponsible son. And he, intimidated by their presence, meekly sat down on the floor. Meanwhile, the ex-girlfriend, seeming to have had enough of Michael, tried to sneak out of the house with a pale face. "Where do you think you're going?" I called out loudly as she attempted to escape alone. "This has nothing to do with me. I'm returning Michael to you," she said in a fluster, trying to leave, but my in-laws caught her and began scolding her alongside Michael. After my in-laws thoroughly reprimanded them, I declared that they would both have to compensate for the affair. I'll be expecting a substantial amount in damages for the affair. Though I was too shocked to say anything when they eloped, I wanted them to fully atone for what they had done. Additionally, my anger towards my husband's attitude and his affair had only grown over these 3 days. I was determined not to be lenient with him anymore. To fulfill this, I stood imposingly before the two of them with a cold voice and announced my demand for alimony. At the word alimony, they seemed quite surprised, as if they hadn't expected it. "What? Alimony?" Their shock, as if they had never considered it, only fueled my anger further. And when I mentioned the going rate for alimony, they panicked and began to say they couldn't pay. "We don't have that kind of money, and there's no need to pay." I knew that Michael had been pouring most of his salary, beyond what was needed for living expenses, into his hobbies. I had warned him several times during our cohabitation, but he always said he wanted to spend on his hobbies until we were married. Still, since we started dating, he had begun to save a bit, so I didn't push too hard, hoping things would change after marriage. My husband, faced with the prospect of paying alimony, disliked the idea so much he turned pale, contemplating borrowing money or selling his possessions. "No way! I'll be broke!" His ex-girlfriend, too, seemed to have little savings and started saying she didn't want to pay. When my in-laws glared at the two of them sharply, they became quiet and looked down, seemingly frightened. To add insult to injury, I told them about the past 3 days. "Also, everyone who attended our wedding knows about your affair. Don't expect to live like before." "What? No way!" At our wedding, there were people from Michael's company and friends from his student days. When they heard about his elopement after the affair, they were very angry, and he had no one on his side. "My life is ruined because of you. What are you gonna do about it?" Then he started lashing out at his ex-girlfriend. "What? Blaming me? You were the one who said you wanted to marry me." So, they began to argue and blame each other, starting a huge fight. Both quick to blame others when things went south, they were a perfect match in that regard, and their arguments were equally at fault. "Nothing good comes from being with you. I shouldn't have gotten involved. That's my line. You've messed up my life." Just a few days ago, these two were close enough to elope, but now, without any remorse, they were angrily blaming each other. Despite being engaged and married to me, Michael chose his ex-girlfriend. There was a problem with her too, knowing it was an affair yet still dating him. The two of them, always blaming others without reflecting on their actions, seemed to deserve each other. Watching their foolish fight, I could only look on in dismay. Later, Michael completely lost the trust of his company due to this incident and his unexplained absence. He had a position but didn't contact anyone and seemed intent on disappearing, angering many for his lack of responsibility. It was natural since his 3-day disappearance had caused trouble for other employees. As a result, he was demoted and soon left the company because it became uncomfortable for him. Friends drifted away, and soon no one was approaching him. Later, with no income and little savings, Michael grumbled about the alimony, but with my in-laws watching, he ended up paying in full. Once the payment was confirmed, I was relieved that I wouldn't have to see my husband again. His ex-girlfriend initially tried to avoid paying alimony and was unresponsive to contact. So, I had no choice but to find her parents, explain the situation in a detailed letter, and include evidence of the affair. They soon contacted me at the number I provided in the letter, apologizing and agreeing to pay the alimony. It seemed the ex-girlfriend had returned to her parents' house and was scolded by them. Thus, the alimony was successfully paid, and I was able to divorce, but for a while, I felt uncomfortable due to the sympathy of those around me who knew the situation. However, things have settled down, and I'm back to living as I did before marriage. I haven't met or contacted my ex-husband since the divorce, but I maintain a good relationship with my former in-laws. By the way, my ex-husband, scolded severely by his parents until the divorce, is now in a near-disowned state and has moved to a distant place. Now, my relationship with my ex-in-laws is like that of good friends with a significant age gap, enjoying hobbies together. Later, I heard through the grapevine that my ex-husband, blaming his hobbies, is living a poor life. It seems he still blames everything but his own disrespectful and irrational behavior. I used to think marriage would change him, but now I'm glad I divorced such an impossible ex-husband. In hindsight, there were signs of his true nature during our cohabitation, and I regret not realizing it before we got married. It was a tough ordeal, but I'm relieved that I discovered his true self before we had kids and was able to leave him. Next time, if I consider marriage, I won't optimistically assume that marriage will change troubling behaviors. Instead, I'll be sure to thoroughly assess the person. I now relish the freedom of living alone, without needing to keep an eye on my ex-husband.